The previous episode ended with Theodore leaving Rose. So, sadly, she said, so he hates me. But maybe that's for the best. I mean, if we go down the path where the prince ends up with the villainess, we'll all die. It's really not unusual when you play a puri-puri otome game. I mean, if the main heroine fails in her pursuit, and the prince and villainess end up together, a third party, fearing their growing influence, will try to assassinate the prince. And being at the scene of the crime with the prince, the villainess will also be attacked and lose her life. It's just a typical bad ending and usually appears in otome games. But for me now, the situation is literally a matter of life and death. The scene changes. The next day, Rose wakes up feeling restless. She says to herself, I couldn't sleep at all. Then she gets up and gets dressed, saying to herself, I think I'll go. And here she remembered when she was with him and said to herself about this moment, I felt like a different person. Then shyly she remembered when he kissed her, and she said to herself, what if he hadn't stopped there? So she screamed in embarrassment and suddenly turned when she heard someone say, You're in good spirits early. Are you done getting ready for school, Miss Rose? And here this person was pouring tea for her. Suddenly, in embarrassment, Rose said, Wait. You could at least knock on the door. Then she said to herself, Olivier, the servant, he's the one who's taken care of Rose since she was little. And here, Olivier said to her, I've done that several times. Then he came closer to her and helped her with her clothes, saying, More importantly, your necklace is twisted, and your shawl is 3 degrees off. At this time, she looked at him nervously and said to herself, He's handsome. Then she said to herself, He's my servant, but also like my older brother, and for Rose, he's a constant companion who doesn't tolerate any nonsense. And here he said to her, Didn't you get enough sleep? At the party, I heard you held hands with the prince and then disappeared. Could it be because you enjoyed yourself too much before marriage? And here Rose said to him nervously, No, that's not. And here he said to her, Did the prince do something to you? But she said to him, Impossible. So he grabbed her collar tightly and raised his glasses, saying, If he hurt you, miss, even if he's a prince. But Rose, embarrassed, said, I said that's not it. Stop jumping to conclusions. And here he said to her, All right then, it's time, let's go. But as she was about to leave, he called her and said, Miss. And when she turned to him, he said, If anything happens, you can talk to me anytime. I'm your personal servant, after all. And here Rose smiled at him and said, Thank you. Then she looked at him and said to herself, Rose was really wicked. But Olivier cared for her. And the scene changes to her university. She was sitting at the back, looking at Theodore, who was talking with his friend. And she said to herself, In this way, it seems like what happened yesterday was just a dream. But suddenly she felt embarrassed and held her book, saying, Or maybe I'm the only one who's bothered by it. And suddenly one of the students noticed her and whispered, saying, It seems like Miss Rose is in a bad mood. When she heard them, she said to herself, They're talking about me again. And suddenly she turned around after hearing someone call her name, Miss Rose, and she said to herself, Oh, what's this? And here it was, Prince Theodore, who said, Do you have a second? So, nervously, she said to herself, Prince Theodore. And when she looked at his finger, she said, His wound. So it wasn't just a dream. And here she tried to touch it, saying, Your wound? Does it hurt? But he flinched nervously and quickly pulled his hands away. So she said to him nervously, I'm sorry. And with a sad face, he said, No, it's okay. And he turned away and walked, saying, More importantly, there's something I want to give you. Come with me. And the prince took her to an empty room where there was no one. Then he took out a bottle and said to her, Do you know what this is? And she looked at him shyly, saying nervously, This. And here Rose's mind wandered, and she said to herself, Could it be a contraceptive? But suddenly Theodore interrupted her thoughts and said, This is a medicine that can prevent a fever. So, nervously and shyly, she said to him, Oh, is that so? Of course it is. Where did you get something like this? And Theodore said to her, Yes. Then he sighed and said, I took them from the medicine store in the palace. It's not like I could ask someone for it. And here Rose said shyly to herself, That's right. If anyone finds out that we're the right person for each other, we'll be married quickly, and then we'll be assassinated and get the bad ending. And here Theodore said to her, So, Miss Rose, let's take it together. And they did, and they took it from her. And they waited for a moment. Then Rose said nervously, I wonder if that worked. But suddenly he gave her the entire bottle and said, It should have an immediate effect, but the effect is quite short, so you need to take it daily. Rose looked at the medicine bottle as Theodore finished. Also, there's no point in taking it unless we do it together. And if one of us gets a fever, the other will be drawn to the fever as well. We have to make sure we don't forget to take it. But clearly, these pills had no effect on Rose because she quickly began to imagine him kissing her. She said to him, Prince Theodore. And she imagined him saying, Stay like this? And she closed her eyes, saying to herself, Is the contraceptive not working? Number. At this time, Theodore tried to wake her up, saying, It seems the medicine is definitely working. And she looked at him in shock and nervously said, Yes, of course. And at the same time, she thought to herself, Oh my God, I thought he was going to kiss me. Then Theodore went to the window and looked out, saying, Yes. And yet, we can manage the problem at hand. The problem is what happens next. And here she said in surprise, After that. And here Theodore said to her, We were supposed to marry as a formality for the sake of our families. But if we become soulmates, I will do everything in my power to make you mine. So she looked at him shyly. And he continued, I would never want to hurt you by having a relationship with you without love. At that moment, Rose understood the reason for his rejection and said to herself, So that's why Prince Theodore rejected me last night. It was to protect me. And here Theodore said, On this note, I was thinking of breaking off our engagement. She smiled and said to herself, Breaking off our engagement? And when he noticed her surprise, he said, What's wrong? If you could, wouldn't you want to leave me too? And Rose replied, saying to him, Yes, I was just hoping that we could end our engagement too. And at the same time, she said to herself, In order to avoid a bad ending, this is the best way. Even if I could marry Prince Theodore, there would be no point if we were assassinated. But Theodore said, The problem is whether our families will allow us to break it off, huh? And to convince them, we need to create a situation where those around us think we have no choice but to end it. Here, Rose said, Right. Then she said to him, What about me doing something that would make me unsuitable to be your wife? That might work. But he refused and nervously said, No, I don't want to ruin your reputation. So she said to him, Reputation? This is not the time for that. Breaking off this engagement is for the good of this world. No, it's for our happiness. At the same time, she said to herself, So that future doesn't happen. And here Theodore said to her, I see. So that's how much you want to leave me. Then he said to her, Understood. Let's do what you think is best. And Rose smiled and said to him, Thank you, Prince Theodore. And he thought to himself, For our happiness? And she also said to herself, To avoid getting the bad ending. Then, with a determined look, she said, All right then, let's begin. Then the scene changes, and she is sitting in class saying, The next lesson is at the church, isn't it? I don't want to walk there. So she looked at Prince Theodore and said with a smile, starting her plan to break off the engagement, That's right, Prince Theodore? Don't you want to carry me to the church? And here Theodore approached her and said, Miss Rose, I understand this is part of our plan, but there's no need to go that far. But Rose said nervously, Rose de Charlier is not fit to be a princess. This is so I can show everyone how arrogant a girl she is.